always called me a disappointment at Christmas for not having a boyfriend. But then my mother stood in front of 20 extended family members holding up her wine glass and announced that I was the family failure single at 35 with no children and no real career. What she didn't know was that I'd been secretly dating someone for 8 months, and he was standing right outside the door, with evidence that would expose everything she'd said about me as a lie. You won't believe what happened when I finally introduced them. Before we continue, please subscribe and hit that notification bell, because this story is about standing up to a lifetime of humiliation and watching the truth set you free in the most satisfying way possible. My name is Rebecca Morrison, and I'm 35 years old. I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I own and run Artisan Rise Bakery, a business I built from the ground up over the past 10 years. For as long as I can remember, my mother, Margaret, has made it her personal mission to remind me and anyone within earshot that I am a disappointment. Single at 35. No children. No husband. Working at a bakery instead of having a real career. The list of my failures, according to her, could fill volumes. That Christmas dinner was supposed to be different. I had promised myself it would be the last time I let her humiliate me in front of the entire family. I had a secret something that would change everything. But as I stood in the doorway of my parents' house, clutching a homemade pie, watching my mother smirk at me over the rim of her wine glass, I realized she had absolutely no idea what was coming. The trouble had started years ago, probably when I turned 30 and still hadn't gotten married. My mother had always been critical, but something shifted then. At every family gathering, she found new and creative ways to point out my shortcomings. At my cousin's wedding 2 years ago, she told the bride's mother that at least her daughter had found someone willing to marry her. At Thanksgiving last year, she asked loudly at the dinner table if I was planning to die alone with cats. I don't even like cats. My younger sister Jennifer had always been the golden child. She got married at 23 to a dentist named Michael, had 2 kids before she turned 30, and now lived in a pristine house in the suburbs with a white picket fence. My mother never missed an opportunity to compare us, usually with me standing right there listening. Jennifer knows how to make a man happy, she would say with that particular smile that meant she was about to twist the knife deeper. That's why she has such a beautiful family. I tried arguing back at first, tried defending my choices and explaining that my life was fulfilling, even if it didn't look like Jennifer's. But my mother had a way of twisting everything I said, making me sound defensive and pathetic. So I learned to stay quiet, to smile and nod, and count the minutes until I could leave. The bakery where I worked wasn't glamorous in my mother's eyes, but I loved it. I had started there 10 years ago as a part-time assistant while figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. Turns out I wanted to make bread. Good bread, the kind that made people close their eyes when they took the first bite. My boss, Helen, had taught me everything she knew about the craft, and when she retired 5 years ago, she helped me secure a loan to buy the business from her. I renamed it Artisan Rise Bakery and poured everything I had into making it succeed. My mother never acknowledged that I owned the bakery. To her, I was just working at some shop. She never asked about my life, never visited the bakery, never seemed interested in anything I did, unless it involved embarrassing me in front of relatives. This Christmas was supposed to be different because of Nathan. I had met him 8 months ago when he came into the bakery looking for a specific type of sourdough his grandmother used to make. He was in town for business meetings, staying at a hotel downtown. We talked for 20 minutes about bread of all things, and he came back the next day and the day after that. Nathan lived in Seattle, but traveled constantly for work as a consultant for restaurant chains. He was quiet, thoughtful, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. We started dating long distance, which was difficult, but somehow worked. He made an effort to visit Milwaukee whenever he could, and I flew out to see him twice. But I didn't tell my family about him. Not because I was ashamed or uncertain about the relationship, but because I knew my mother would find some way to ruin it. She would criticize him or me or the relationship itself. She would make comments about my age, about how I was finally settling because my options were running out. She would turn something good into something painful. So I kept Nathan to myself, this wonderful secret that was mine alone. Until Christmas. I arrived at my parents' house on Christmas Eve carrying my homemade apple pie, the one thing my mother grudgingly admitted I made well. Nathan was supposed to arrive 30 minutes after me. We had planned it carefully. I would go in first, endure whatever comments my mother made, and then Nathan would arrive. I wanted her to say all the things she usually said before she knew I had someone. I wanted her words on record. The living room was packed with relatives. Aunts, uncles, cousins I barely recognized, all gathered around drinking wine and making small talk. My mother stood in the center like a queen holding court. She saw me immediately. "Oh, good, you made it," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "We were just talking about you." My stomach tightened, but I forced a smile. "All good things, I hope." My mother laughed that particular laugh that meant something cruel was coming. "Well, we were just discussing how at 35, you're now officially the oldest unmarried person in the family. Even Cousin David found someone, and he lived in his mother's basement until he was 33. There was uncomfortable laughter from a few people. Most just looked away. My sister Jennifer was absorbed in her phone, her 2 kids running circles around the coffee table. "Mom, can we not do this tonight?" I said quietly. "Do what my mother asked innocently. I'm just stating facts. You are single, you have no children, and you work at a bakery. These are simply the realities of your life. I own the bakery." I corrected for what felt like the 1,000th time. "I'm a business owner." Right, my mother said dismissively. "But let's be honest, Rebecca. If you had pursued a real career, something professional like Jennifer's Michael in dentistry, you might have attracted a better caliber of man. Instead, you're making bread." The way she said making bread made it sound like I was doing something vaguely shameful. Several people in the room shifted uncomfortably. My Uncle Thomas cleared his throat and changed the subject, asking about the football game. But my mother wasn't done. She moved closer to me, lowering her voice, so only I and a few nearby relatives could hear. "I invited your cousin Amanda tonight specifically, so you two could talk," she said. "She just got divorced and is having trouble adjusting. I thought you could give her advice on being alone. You've had so much practice." The cruelty was so casual, so matter-of-fact that it took my breath away. This was my mother, the woman who was supposed to love and support me, and she was using me as a cautionary tale for divorced relatives. I set down my pie on the entry table and pulled out my phone. I had been recording since I walked in the door. It was something Nathan had suggested after I told him about my mother's behavior. "Document it," he'd said. "You've been telling me these stories for months, but I don't think you realize how bad they sound. Record a family gathering so you can hear it objectively." I'd been resistant at first, feeling like it was somehow disloyal. But now standing in my parents' living room, being used as an example of failure, I was glad I'd listened. "Actually, Mom," I said loud enough for the room to hear, "I'd like you to meet someone." My mother's expression shifted to confusion. "Meet someone who—" There was a knock at the door. Perfect timing. I opened it to reveal Nathan standing there with a bottle of wine and a warm smile. He was tall, professionally dressed, in dark slacks and a blue sweater, and looked exactly like the kind of man my mother would approve of on paper. "Everyone," I said, projecting my voice across the room, "this is Nathan Chen, my boyfriend of 8 months. The room went silent. My mother's face cycled through several expressions: surprise, confusion, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like panic. 8 months, she repeated. "You've been dating someone for 8 months and didn't tell us." I didn't tell you, I corrected, because I knew you would find a way to ruin it. Just like you've spent the last 5 years ruining every good thing in my life. Nathan stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He extended his hand to my mother with perfect politeness. Mrs. Morrison, it's nice to finally meet you. Rebecca has told me so much about you. My mother shook his hand automatically, but her eyes were on me. Rebecca, we need to talk about this privately. Why, I asked. You had no problem discussing my failures publicly. Why should my successes be private? Because this is family business, my mother hissed. Exactly, I said. So let's talk about it with the family. Let's talk about how you've spent years telling everyone I'm a disappointment, how you compare me to Jennifer at every opportunity, how you dismiss my business as if owning a successful bakery means nothing. That's not fair, my mother said, looking around for support. I was trying to motivate you. Motivate me to what I asked. To hate myself. To feel worthless. To believe that my value as a person depends entirely on whether I have a husband and children. Nathan's hand found mine and squeezed gently. Rebecca told me about your concerns, he said to my mother, his voice calm and reasonable. About her being single, about her career choices. So I wanted to come tonight and address those concerns directly. My mother's expression brightened slightly. She thought she was about to get validation that Nathan would agree her criticisms had been helpful. First, Nathan continued, Rebecca isn't just working at a bakery. She owns Artisan Rise Bakery, which she built into a thriving business over the past 5 years. She employs 12 people, expanded twice, and has won multiple awards for her artisan breads. She has relationships with suppliers and customers that most business owners would envy. What about that isn't a real career? My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. Second, Nathan said Rebecca's relationship status has nothing to do with her value as a person. She's kind, talented, hardworking, and has built a life she's proud of. The fact that she didn't follow your exact timeline doesn't make her a failure. It makes her someone who chose her own path. I could see my mother's jaw tightening. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by strangers. Especially not by men who looked like Nathan, professional and put together, and exactly the type she'd always said I could never attract. Nathan, you seem like a wonderful man, my mother said, switching tactics. Her voice took on that saccharine sweetness she used when she was trying to manipulate someone. And I'm so happy that you and Rebecca found each other. Maybe now she'll finally settle down, start a family. It's not too late. I felt Nathan's hand tighten on mine. Actually, he said, Rebecca and I have discussed our future quite thoroughly. And if we do decide to have children, it will be because we want to, not because anyone else thinks we should. But more importantly, Rebecca's life doesn't need to be validated by marriage or children. She's already built something meaningful. The bakery isn't just a job, it's her passion, her art, her legacy. My mother laughed, but it sounded forced. Oh, Nathan, don't be silly, she said. Once you're married, Rebecca won't need to work. She can finally relax, have babies, be a proper wife. The room erupted in uncomfortable murmurs. Several people looked shocked that my mother had actually said that out loud. My Uncle Thomas set down his drink. Jennifer finally looked up from her phone. Even my father, who usually stayed silent during these exchanges, looked disturbed. Mom, I said, my voice shaking slightly. Did you just say that working on something I built myself isn't being proper? I just meant that marriage and family should be a woman's priority, my mother said, backtracking slightly. Why, Nathan asked simply. Because that's how things are done, my mother snapped, losing her composure. Rebecca has wasted years on that bakery when she could have been finding a husband, building a real life. I built a real life, I said, my voice stronger now. I built a business from nothing. I employ people. I contribute to my community. I wake up every day doing something I love. How is that not real? My mother's face flushed red. You don't understand, she said to Nathan, ignoring me entirely. I've been trying for years to help Rebecca see that she was wasting her potential. Someone had to tell her the truth. The truth, I repeated. Let me tell you about truth, Mom. I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. This is what you said when I walked in tonight. I played back her voice. At 35, you're now officially the oldest unmarried person in the family. Even cousin David found someone and he lived in his mother's basement until he was 33. Then the second clip. If you had pursued a real career, you might have attracted a better caliber of man. Instead, you're making bread. And finally, the third. I invited your cousin Amanda so you could give her advice on being alone. You've had so much practice. The room was absolutely silent. I had more recordings, hours of them from various family gatherings, but these three were enough. The cruelty was undeniable when you heard it played back without the context of family loyalty or the excuse of tough love. That's enough, my mother said, her voice sharp. Stop playing those. Why, I asked. Because it's embarrassing. Because everyone can now hear what I've been dealing with for years. Because your narrative about motivating me falls apart when they hear you calling me a failure, a disappointment, pathetic. I was frustrated. My mother protested. I was trying to help you. You were being cruel, I said flatly. And you were doing it deliberately. You enjoyed it. You enjoyed making me feel small because it made you feel powerful. Jennifer stood up from where she'd been sitting quietly. She's right, Mom, Jennifer said, her voice shaking. I've heard you say worse things when it was just the three of us. You've been horrible to Rebecca for years, and I've said nothing because I didn't want to become your target. Jennifer, don't you turn on me too, my mother said, panic creeping into her voice. I'm not turning on you, Jennifer said. I'm just finally admitting the truth. You've been emotionally abusive to Rebecca, and we all let it happen because it was easier than confronting you. Uncle Thomas spoke up. Margaret, I think we need to have an honest conversation here, not about Rebecca's relationship, but about your behavior. My mother looked around wildly, seeking an ally, but found none. Even my father was looking at her with an expression I'd never seen before. Disappointment. This is ridiculous, my mother said, her voice rising. I'm being attacked for caring about my daughter. You're being held accountable for years of cruelty, Nathan said quietly. There's a difference. My mother glared at him, and I saw the moment she decided to go nuclear. I don't need to listen to this, she said. Rebecca, if you want to throw away your family for some man you barely know, that's your choice. But don't come crying to me when it all falls apart. I won't, I said, because unlike you, Nathan actually supports what I do. He doesn't try to tear me down to build himself up. We left shortly after that. Nathan and I walked out of my parents' house with several family members following us, including Jennifer, Uncle Thomas, and my Aunt Patricia. We stood in the driveway together, nobody quite sure what to say. I'm sorry, Jennifer said finally. I should have stood up for you years ago. Thank you for saying that, I replied. The weeks after Christmas were tense. My mother didn't call, didn't text, didn't acknowledge what had happened. I thought maybe finally she would reflect on her behavior and apologize. I should have known better. 3 weeks later, Jennifer called me in a panic. Rebecca, you need to know what Mom is planning, she said breathlessly. She's organizing a family intervention. An intervention for what, I asked, confused. For you, Jennifer said. She's calling everyone aunts, uncles, cousins, telling them you're in an abusive relationship, that Nathan has isolated you from your family, and she needs to save you. I felt anger surge through me. She's doing what it gets worse, Jennifer continued. She's planning it for this Sunday at the house. She's convinced that if everyone confronts you together, you'll see the truth and leave Nathan. I can't believe this, I said, though part of me absolutely could. This was exactly the kind of thing my mother would do. Turn herself into the hero, make me the victim who needed saving, and completely ignore the actual issues. "What are you going to do?" Jennifer asked. "I'm going to end this," I said, "once and for all." I called Nathan immediately and told him what was happening. His response was immediate and clear. "Let's go," he said. "Let's go to this intervention and set the record straight." "Nathan, it's going to be ugly," I warned. "I don't care," he said. "She's crossed a line. Telling people you're being abused isn't just insulting to you. It's insulting to people who actually are in abusive situations. This needs to stop." He was right. I spent the rest of the week preparing. I gathered evidence, bank statements from the bakery showing its profitability, the loan documents from when I bought it, photos of the awards we'd won, letters from customers, employment records showing I had 12 people on payroll. I also reached out to several family members privately, people like Uncle Thomas and Aunt Patricia, who had witnessed my mother's behavior over the years and had looked uncomfortable but said nothing. I told them what my mother was planning and asked if they would be willing to speak honestly about what they'd seen. They all agreed. By the time Sunday arrived, I was ready. Nathan flew in Saturday night, and we drove to my parents' house together. The driveway was packed with cars. My mother had really pulled out all the stops, getting nearly the entire extended family there. "Ready?" Nathan asked as we sat in the car. "Ready," I said. We walked to the door together. I didn't bother knocking, just walked right in. The living room was packed with people, maybe 25 family members, all sitting or standing in awkward clusters. They all turned to look at us when we entered, expressions ranging from concern to curiosity to embarrassment. And there, standing in the center of it all, like a conductor before an orchestra, was my mother. "Rebecca," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Thank God you're here. We need to talk about what's happening to you." I looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. Then I smiled. "Yes, Mom," I said. "Let's talk about what's been happening. Let's talk about all of it." My mother faltered slightly at my tone, but recovered quickly. "Everyone here cares about you, Rebecca," she said. "We're worried about your relationship with this man." "This man has a name," Nathan said calmly. "I'm Nathan Chin, in case anyone's forgotten." "Of course," my mother said, though she didn't look at him. "Nathan, we're not attacking you. We're just concerned about how quickly this relationship has progressed and how Rebecca has cut herself off from her family." "I haven't cut myself off from anyone," I said clearly. "I set a boundary after years of emotional abuse. There's a difference." Uncle Thomas cleared his throat. "Rebecca, your mother says you've been acting strangely, that you've changed." "I have changed?" I agreed. "I've stopped accepting abuse. Is that what concerns everyone?" There was uncomfortable shifting in the room. Aunt Patricia spoke up carefully. "Margaret, maybe we should let Rebecca explain." "Patricia, please," my mother interrupted. "Let me handle this." She turned back to me, her expression shifting to something that might have passed for maternal concern if you didn't know her. "Sweetheart, I know you think I've been hard on you," she said, "but everything I've done has been out of love, and now I'm afraid that Nathan has taken advantage of your vulnerability." "My vulnerability," I repeated. "You mean the vulnerability you created by spending 35 years telling me I was worthless?" "That's not what I did," my mother protested, looking around for support. "I pushed you to be better, to have higher standards than what I asked, than owning a successful business, than being financially independent, than building something meaningful with my own hands. I'm successful," I said, my voice rising. "I employ 12 people who depend on me for their livelihoods. I expanded my business twice in 5 years. I've won awards for my work. I've built relationships with suppliers and customers that took years to develop. What about any of that suggests I need higher standards?" My mother opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. "And as for Nathan taking advantage of me," I continued, "let me be clear. Nathan has done nothing but support my work, encourage my ambitions, and treat me with respect. Things you have never done. He didn't isolate me from family. I chose to distance myself after decades of being told I was a disappointment. I pulled out my phone again. Since we're all here to talk about truth, let's listen to some. I played several recordings. My mother at last year's Thanksgiving saying I would die alone. My mother at a cousin's birthday party explaining that at least her other daughter knew how to make a man happy. My mother at Easter telling Aunt Patricia that she didn't know where she went wrong with me. The recordings went on for several minutes. With each clip, my mother's face grew paler and the room grew quieter. These recordings span 5 years, I said when they finished. 5 years of constant criticism, comparison, and cruelty. And every single person in this room has heard her say things like this at one time or another. Most of you looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. A few of you even laughed along. I looked around the room. So tell me, is this the behavior of someone who loves her daughter, or someone who enjoys having power over another person? My mother's composure finally cracked completely. How dare you record me? She said, her voice shaking with rage. Those were private family conversations. And yet you had no problem publicly humiliating me in front of these same family members for years, I replied. Jennifer stood up from where she'd been sitting in the corner. She's telling the truth, Jennifer said, her voice steady. I've witnessed Mom's behavior my entire life. The only reason I wasn't a target is because I got married young and fit the mold she wanted. But I've watched her tear Rebecca down for years, and I said nothing because I was grateful it wasn't me. Jennifer, my mother said desperately, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Jennifer interrupted, and I'm done pretending this is normal family behavior. What you've done to Rebecca is abusive, and we all enabled it. Aunt Patricia stood up next. Margaret, she said firmly, I've known you for 30 years, and I've watched you become increasingly cruel to Rebecca. When she bought the bakery, you told me it was embarrassing. When she won that baking award, you said it didn't count because it was just bread. You've never once celebrated her achievements. Uncle Thomas added, his voice. I've been uncomfortable at family gatherings for years, he admitted. The way you talk to Rebecca about Rebecca, it's not right. And we've all been too cowardly to say anything. My mother looked around wildly, seeking anyone who would defend her. But person after person either looked away or nodded in agreement with what had been said. This is all Nathan's fault, my mother said, desperately pointing at him. He's turned you all against me. Before he showed up, we were fine. We weren't fine, I said quietly. I was miserable. I dreaded every family gathering because I knew you would find some way to humiliate me. I stayed away from holidays when I could. I stopped calling because every conversation left me feeling worthless. We were never fine, Mom. You just never noticed my pain because it wasn't important to you. Nathan stepped forward, his voice calm and measured. Mrs. Morrison, I need to say something, he said. I love your daughter. I love her strength, her kindness, her incredible talent. I love the way she pours herself into her work and the way she cares about her employees. I love who she is exactly as she is, and nothing you say or do will change that. But I will not stand by while you spread lies about our relationship to manipulate your family. Actually, Mrs. Morrison, I said, speaking before my mother could respond, there's one more thing everyone should know. I pulled out a folder I'd brought with me. These are the financial statements for Artisan Rise Bakery for the past 3 years. I passed copies around the room. As you can see, I'm not just making bread. I'm running a business that grossed $400,000 last year. I employ 12 people full-time. I've expanded twice. I've built something real and valuable. My mother's face went from red to white. She'd never asked about the bakery's finances. She'd never visited. She'd never shown the slightest interest in what I'd built. And now she was seeing along with everyone else that her narrative about me wasting my life was completely false. Also, I continued, Nathan isn't some random man I barely know. We've been together for 8 months. We're planning a future together, and he's been nothing but supportive of my work and my dreams. The things you've told everyone about him isolating me or being controlling are complete fabrications designed to make yourself look like a concerned mother instead of what you really are, which is what my mother demanded. An emotional abuser who can't stand that I finally stood up to you, I said. The room was silent. My mother looked around one more time, desperate, and then her expression hardened. Fine, she said coldly. If that's how you all feel, then leave. All of you. I don't need any of you. Actually, Mom, I said we're already gone. Some of us left a long time ago. You just didn't notice. Nathan and I turned and walked out. This time, half the people in the room followed us. Jennifer, Aunt Patricia, Uncle Thomas, several cousins. We stood in the driveway together in the cold January air, nobody quite sure what to say. Finally, Uncle Thomas broke the silence. I'm sorry, Rebecca, he said, for all of it, for letting it go on so long. Thank you, I said simply. In the months that followed, my mother never apologized. She told anyone who would listen that I had turned the family against her, that I was cruel and ungrateful, that she was the real victim. But her audience grew smaller as more people realized the truth. My father eventually moved into his own apartment, tired of her bitterness and constant blame. Jennifer filed for divorce from Michael, realizing that she'd married so young, partly to escape our mother's control, and started rebuilding her own life. Several family members stopped speaking to my mother, entirely unwilling to tolerate her manipulation anymore. My mother ended up exactly where she'd always feared she would be. Alone. But not through circumstance or bad luck. She was alone because she'd driven everyone away through years of cruelty masked as concern. She'd built her identity on control and criticism, and when those tools no longer worked, she had nothing left. As for me, Nathan and I got engaged 3 months after that intervention. We married in a small ceremony 6 months later, surrounded by the people who actually loved and supported us. Jennifer stood as my maid of honor. Uncle Thomas walked me down the aisle. Aunt Patricia cried happy tears. My father came, though he sat quietly in the back, and left before the reception. My mother was not invited. The bakery continued to thrive. We opened a second location 18 months after the wedding. I hired more staff, expanded our wholesale accounts, and started teaching baking classes on weekends. Everything my mother had dismissed as not a real career became the foundation of a life I was genuinely proud of. Looking back on that Christmas dinner and the intervention that followed, I realized the greatest revenge wasn't in exposing my mother or proving my success to everyone. It was in finally choosing myself, in walking away from her approval and building a life I loved, regardless of whether she validated it. She'd spent 35 years trying to make me feel worthless, telling me my choices were wrong, that my path was a mistake, that I was a disappointment. But in the end, I discovered something she never understood. My worth had never depended on her validation at all. I was successful because I'd built something meaningful with my own hands. I was happy because I'd found a partner who celebrated my ambitions instead of diminishing them. I was fulfilled because I woke up every day doing work I loved. And none of that required my mother's approval. The last time I heard from her was 2 years after the wedding. She sent a short email saying that if I was willing to apologize and admit I'd been influenced by Nathan, she would consider letting me back into the family. I deleted it without responding because I'd finally learned the most important lesson. Some people will never see your value no matter what you achieve. Some people need you to be small so they can feel big. Some people will criticize every choice you make because your happiness threatens their narrative. And the most powerful thing you can do is stop seeking their approval and start living for yourself. My mother wanted me to believe I was a failure, but I built a business, found love, created a life full of meaning and purpose. The only failure in this story was hers. The failure to see her daughter's strength. The failure to celebrate her daughter's success. The failure to love without conditions or demands. And that failure was never mine to carry. I put it down that Christmas when I walked out of her house, and I never picked it up again.